the chosen one. The storm raged inside you, fierce and unrelenting. You could not tell if it came from the heavens or from your own trembling soul. There was a voice, faint yet thunderous, whispering through the silence. It called you by name. It told you this moment would define everything. And though the world around you seemed still, something eternal had already begun to move. You tried to ignore it, to reason it away as a flicker of imagination, but the air grew heavy. The silence sharpened. The pulse in your left hand began to burn with an unfamiliar rhythm, as if a divine signal had been etched into your skin long before you were born. You looked down, and though you could not see it, you could feel it, a presence, ancient and vast, awakening within you. You were never ordinary. You knew that. But knowing is not the same as accepting. For years, you ran from the truth, clinging to a life that felt safe but hollow. You sought validation in the noise of the world, yet the whisper in your soul would not leave you. It grew louder, clearer, more insistent until tonight, when silence itself became a mirror. And in that mirror, you saw it, the mark, the call, the beginning of your becoming, the chosen one. They call you, but chosen for what? That question tore at your heart. Was it purpose or punishment, destiny or illusion? You did not know. You only knew that something sacred had begun to unravel your certainty. You felt both seen and judged, both loved and undone. And somewhere between fear and wonder, your faith began to fracture. The light flickered above you. A single word crossed your mind. Why? It was not rebellion, but revelation. You wanted to understand the meaning behind the divine mark that throbbed beneath your skin. You wanted to know why you were chosen when so many others seemed more deserving, more faithful, more whole. The silence offered no answer, only a stirring wind that seemed to whisper trust. You stood before the window, watching rain trace patterns down the glass. Each drop felt like a question falling from heaven. Could it be that this mark was not a blessing but a burden? A sign not of favor, but of a path that would demand everything you were. The thought both terrified and awakened you, because deep down you sensed the truth. Greatness never arrives without breaking what came before. And yet, in that breaking, something luminous stirred. You felt your left hand grow warm again, almost painfully so. Your pulse aligned with something ancient, something infinite. You heard the whisper once more. It was no longer distant, no longer foreign. It spoke within you. You have been set apart, not for comfort, but for calling. You have been chosen, not because you are ready, but because you are willing to rise. Tears came, unbidden. You did not know if they were of fear or surrender. The weight of divine expectation pressed upon your chest, and yet, for the first time, your spirit began to breathe. You looked again at your trembling hand. It seemed ordinary, fragile, human, but deep within, a flame had been lit. The mark was real. The mission had begun. Still, doubt crept in like a shadow. What if this was madness? What if the voice was not divine but a trick of the mind? You remembered every failure, every scar, every moment you had fallen short of your own belief. How could someone so flawed carry something sacred? You turned away from the window, pressing your hand to your heart as if to silence the storm within. But the storm only deepened. That night, sleep did not come easily. Each time your eyes closed, visions rose before you, glimpses of paths untraveled, faces unknown, a light that both beckoned and blinded. You saw yourself standing on the edge of something vast, torn between surrender and resistance. The mark pulsed again, a heartbeat not your own. And through the haze of doubt, a single truth began to echo. To be chosen is not to be comfortable, it is to be called. Morning broke through the window like a soft confession. You awoke with the memory of that whisper still in your soul. The air felt charged, alive with unseen presence. The world had not changed, but you had. Every sound, every shadow seemed to carry meaning. Every breath felt like a prayer you did not yet understand. You rose slowly, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon you. Somewhere deep inside, you knew this was the first day of your true life. The day your faith would no longer be inherited, but earned. The day your questions would matter more than your answers. The day you would begin walking a path lit, not by certainty, but by calling. You looked once more at your left hand. The warmth was gone, but the knowing remained. You could no longer pretend you were blind. You were marked not by fate, but by divine intent. And though you did not yet understand what it meant, you knew this truth. You could not return to who you were before. You are the chosen one, not because you are perfect, but because you are willing to seek what lies beyond the known. The mark is not a promise of ease, but of purpose. It will test you, transform you, and ultimately, it will reveal you. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel that quiet stirring in your spirit. The world is not waiting for your certainty, it is waiting for your courage. You were called not to escape the storm, but to walk through it, to be the light within it. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of the chosen one. You woke with the echo of that whisper still humming in your chest. The world outside was calm, but something within you refused to rest. The air felt different now, charged with unseen purpose. Every sound, the ticking clock, the soft murmur of wind seemed to carry meaning. You wanted to dismiss it, to tell yourself it was a dream, but deep down you knew something sacred had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. You reached for your left hand. It was cool now, yet the phantom warmth lingered like a memory. You turned it over, under the morning light, half expecting to see an actual mark burned into your skin. There was nothing, just flesh and shadow. Yet your heart recognized a truth your eyes could not. You were marked not by sight, but by spirit. You tried to shake it off, to move through your day as if nothing had changed, but every action felt strange, detached, as if the world had turned translucent and you were walking through layers of time that no longer belonged entirely to you. You caught your reflection in a passing window and barely recognized yourself. The person staring back carried a question too heavy for words. Why me? That question would not let you go. It echoed through every moment, growing louder each time you tried to silence it. You wanted answers clear, logical, immediate. But what you received instead were signs, subtle, uncomfortable, unmistakable, a stranger's words that pierced too deep, a sudden gust of wind in a room with no open windows, a dream that mirrored your waking thoughts. It was as if heaven itself was speaking a language you were only beginning to remember. Still, doubt gnawed at your faith. Maybe this was all coincidence, you told yourself. Maybe your mind was conjuring meaning where there was none, and yet each denial made the whisper stronger. The mark on your left hand began to throb again, not painfully, but insistently, as if reminding you that running was no longer an option. You sat alone that night, the lights dimmed, the air thick with questions. The silence grew so heavy it felt alive. You wanted to pray, but you didn't know what to say. What words could reach a God who had already chosen you without explanation? You thought of every failure, every moment you had turned away from faith, every secret shame buried beneath your smile. You whispered, barely audible, "I'm not ready." And in the stillness, a quiet reply brushed your soul, "You never are." That was the first moment you wept, not from fear, but from surrender. The kind of tears that cleanse the space between belief and becoming. The kind that whisper, "I am willing, even if I am afraid." Days passed, but they no longer moved the way they once did. Time felt curved now, like it was folding around you. You began noticing patterns, numbers repeating, dreams overlapping with waking life, people entering your path at the exact moment you needed them. You could no longer separate chance from destiny. The mark was drawing you towards something, though you could not yet name it. Then came the first test. A friend you trusted laughed when you told them about the mark. Their words were sharp, their tone cold with disbelief. They told you to let go of childish fantasies, to focus on the real world. Their mockery cut deep, but what wounded you most was your own reaction. You doubted yourself again. You felt foolish, small. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was nothing. But that night, you dreamt again. You were standing in a field of shadows. The sky burned with gold, yet your path was covered in ash. You looked down, and the mark on your hand glowed faintly. A voice, neither male nor female, whispered, "When the world rejects you, remember, it is not them who chose you. It is I." You awoke trembling. The dream felt more real than waking life. The words carved themselves into your heart. You realized then that being chosen was not about comfort or recognition. It was about endurance. You were not called to be understood. You were called to walk alone until your light became undeniable. Still, loneliness pressed against you like a weight. There were moments you wanted to trade the divine for the familiar, to abandon the sacred for something you could explain. But every time you tried, life intervened, a sign, a dream, a moment of uncanny alignment that pulled you back toward faith. It was as if the universe itself refused to let you escape your own destiny. The mark was not just a symbol, it was a compass, guiding you toward a life that demanded more of your heart than you had ever given. And that realization terrified you, because to follow it meant losing what was safe. It meant surrendering control. It meant dying to who you were, to become who you were meant to be. You stood again before the mirror one night, your reflection flickering in the faint light. You could see in your own eyes the war between faith and fear, between the call and your resistance. You lifted your left hand, slowly, as if in oath. You whispered, "If I am truly chosen, show me the way." And in that instant, the light in the room flickered once, then steadied. Not a grand miracle, just enough to let you know you were heard. You sank to your knees, breath trembling, heart raw. The mark pulsed again. This time, it did not burn. It glowed. It felt alive. It felt reassuring. You understood then that being chosen did not mean being spared from pain. It meant being trusted with purpose. And that realization broke something open inside you. Faith did not suddenly make sense. It rarely does. But it began to feel alive again. You stopped searching for proof and began searching for presence. Each step, each breath, each whisper of the wind became a sacred reminder that you were not walking alone. The chosen one, the title, no longer frightened you. It humbled you, because now you saw it not as a crown, but as a calling, a divine invitation to walk through darkness carrying light that wasn't yours, but was entrusted to you. Still, one question remained. If you had been chosen, for what purpose? What was this mark leading you toward? You could feel the answer stirring somewhere ahead, beyond what you could see, yet closer than your own breath. And so, with trembling hands and an awakening soul, you whispered the words that would shape the rest of your journey. "I am ready, even if I am afraid." The night answered not with thunder, but with peace, the kind that only comes when the storm inside begins to understand its purpose. The chosen one. The rain had stopped, but your heart had not. It beat with a rhythm unfamiliar, an echo that did not belong to time. Morning light bled through the curtains like a gentle awakening, but the peace it promised never reached you, because deep within you knew the stillness before you was not rest, it was preparation. Something unseen was drawing near. You stood before the mirror again, that same left hand lifted without command. You had begun to sense it even before you moved the subtle pull of something divine, or dangerous, or both. The mark beneath your skin pulsed once, faint but certain. You whispered, "I am ready," though part of you still trembled at the thought. You were beginning to understand that readiness was not courage, it was surrender. You tried to resume life as usual, to act as though your world had not tilted towards something vast and mysterious. Yet everything ordinary had begun to feel symbolic. Every person you passed seemed to carry hidden meaning. Every word from a stranger felt like a message. You were caught between the visible and the unseen, between faith and confusion. Then came the silence, the kind that doesn't bring peace but questions. Days passed with no signs, no whispers, no visions. The mark grew cold. Your prayers felt hollow, swallowed by the void. You began to wonder if it had all been in your head. Perhaps the divine had retreated, leaving you with nothing but an echo. That was when the doubt began to feast. You sat alone, night after night, wrestling with invisible wars. Maybe I imagined it, you told yourself. Maybe I wanted to believe so badly that I created the sign myself. You tried to bury the memory, but faith once awakened does not die quietly. It lingers in the corners of thought, waiting for surrender. One evening, exhausted by uncertainty, you walked outside. The air was cool, the sky swollen with clouds. You wandered without direction, led only by restlessness. A child's laughter broke the silence. You turned to see a young boy running through the puddles, his mother calling after him. He stumbled, fell, and scraped his knee. For a moment, you almost walked away, but something in you stopped. You knelt beside him, gently helping him up. He smiled through tears and whispered, "It's okay. It doesn't even hurt anymore." His small hand brushed yours, and for an instant you felt it, the pulse of the mark again, warm and alive. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. You realized then that the mark was not meant to be sought in visions or voices, but in moments of compassion, in the quiet act of choosing love over indifference. The divine was not absent. It had simply changed its language. That night, as you returned home, the whisper came again, faint but unmistakable. "You seek signs in the sky when I have placed them in the faces of those you meet." You froze, heart pounding. The voice carried neither judgment nor command. It was tender, patient, like the sound of eternity breathing softly through your name. Tears welled again, but this time they carried peace. You understood. Faith was not built on proof, it was built on presence. Still, the path was far from simple, because just when you began to find peace in the silence, the storm returned, but this time not from within. It came from others. Those around you began to notice the change. Some called it strength, others called it madness. You spoke with a conviction they could not understand, and your words, though gentle, carried a weight that unsettled them. People whispered, friends distanced themselves. They said you were lost in superstition, chasing fantasies of purpose in a purposeless world. Their disbelief wounded you more than you wanted to admit. You questioned yourself again. Maybe they were right. Maybe the mark was only metaphor, the whisper only the voice of your longing. But then another sign, quiet and unmistakable. You met an old woman by the side of the road, struggling to lift her basket. Without thinking, you helped her. She looked at you, her eyes bright with something ancient. She placed her wrinkled hand over your left one and whispered, "Ah, the mark. It burns brighter in those who doubt, because doubt is the beginning of faith." You stood frozen. The woman smiled and walked away before you could ask her who she was, but her words struck you like lightning, clear, undeniable. Doubt was not your enemy, it was your initiation. The storm was not punishment, it was preparation. You began to see your struggles differently. The loneliness, the ridicule, the silence, they were chisels shaping your soul. You were not losing faith, you were being refined by it. Still, there remained one unspoken fear. What if I fail this calling? What if your doubts outweighed your devotion? What if your human heart could not bear a divine purpose? You asked the question quietly one night, staring again at your left hand. And the answer came not in sound, but in sensation, a warmth, a pulse, a steady reassurance. You realized then that faith was never about being fearless. It was about being faithful despite the fear. The mark was not proof of perfection, it was proof of promise. The days that followed were not easier, but they were different. You began to walk with awareness. Each breath felt sacred, each act intentional. The mark no longer needed to glow. You could feel its rhythm aligning with your own. You were learning the language of trust. And just when you thought you had begun to understand it, life tested you again. A door closed, something you deeply wanted slipped from your grasp. You prayed, pleaded, waited, but heaven stayed silent. For a moment, anger replaced awe. You shouted into the void, "Why call me chosen if you would leave me in the dark?" The silence that followed was not cold, it was compassionate. But it offered no explanation, only presence. You fell to your knees. And in that surrender, something shifted. You realized the divine did not exist to grant your desires. It existed to awaken your purpose. The path of the chosen was not about what you gained, it was about what you gave. As that truth sank in, the mark pulsed once more, stronger than ever. This time, you did not look for a sign. You simply listened to your heartbeat, and in it, you heard the whisper again. You are not alone. You are becoming. You exhaled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, you smiled. Not because you understood, but because you finally accepted that you didn't need to. You are the chosen one, not because of your strength, but because of your surrender. The chosen one. The wind carried your name again, soft as breath, sharp as memory. You had learned to recognize it now, not the voice of the world, not even the sound of your own thoughts, but something deeper, quieter, like the heartbeat of the divine beneath the noise of existence. You no longer ran from it, but that didn't mean you understood it. You had accepted the mark. You had accepted the call, but you had not yet accepted the cost, because being chosen always demands something sacred in return, and this was the season of loss. It began subtly. Doors you once trusted began to close. People who had walked beside you began to drift away, some in silence, others in storms. You reached out, tried to hold on, but the more you grasped, the more they slipped through your fingers. At first, you thought it was punishment. You wondered if the mark was stripping you of everything you loved. But in the quiet hours, when the ache grew too heavy to carry, a whisper came. I am not taking from you. I am clearing space within you. Still, you struggled, because the mind does not easily surrender what the soul knows must go. You fought the calling even as you obeyed it. Some nights, you prayed with fire. Other nights, you cursed the silence that followed. You questioned everything, faith, purpose, even the mark itself. You began to fear that your belief had been nothing more than illusion wearing holy light. And yet even in your rebellion, the mark did not fade. It pulsed faintly, patient as mercy. There were moments when you tried to turn away from it completely. You told yourself you would go back to the life you knew, to comfort, to normalcy. But normal no longer fit. You wore it like a garment, 2 sizes too small, suffocating and false. You had outgrown who you were, yet had not yet become who you were meant to be. The in-between is the loneliest place of all. One night, the storm returned. Not outside, but within. You couldn't sleep. Memories rose like ghosts, every mistake, every regret, every unspoken fear. You pressed your left hand against your chest, as if to quiet the chaos, but the mark burned with new intensity. It hurt, and in that pain, a revelation broke through. You realized that divine transformation is rarely gentle. The fire that refines also consumes. The breaking was necessary. The mark was not there to bless what was comfortable. It was there to awaken what was eternal. The whisper came again, this time clear as truth. You asked for purpose. Purpose is forged in loss. You asked for strength. Strength is born in surrender. You asked to be chosen. Now, become what you were chosen to be. You fell to your knees, trembling. The words carved through the hollow places of your heart, and for a moment you felt both destroyed and reborn. The tears came again, not of sorrow this time, but of clarity. You finally understood. The divine was not outside you. It was within. The mark was not a sign from heaven. It was heaven's signature written into your being. The next morning, the world looked the same, but you no longer did. You carried yourself differently, quietly, intentionally. The glow of certainty had been replaced with the weight of understanding. You had seen what most could not see, and now you could never unsee it. People noticed. Some felt peace around you, others felt discomfort. Your energy stirred what was hidden in them, their longing, their fear, their envy. Some reached for your light, others turned away from it. You learned then that being chosen does not mean being adored, it means being set apart. You began to speak less, but feel more. The mark had made your silence sacred. When others spoke of despair, you listened not with your ears, but with your soul. You saw how every wound carried a hidden seed of awakening. You wanted to tell them what you had learned, that pain is not the enemy, but the messenger. But you knew that truth can only be received when one is ready. So you waited, you watched, you prayed for them in the spaces between words. Still, there were nights when the loneliness crept back. You wondered if the divine had asked too much of you. To be chosen was to carry a weight invisible to others, to feel deeply what they ignore, to love what they abandon, to see beyond what they can bear to look at. Some days you longed to return to blindness, but every time you tried to retreat, the mark reminded you with its quiet pulse that there was no going back. You had crossed the threshold. You had tasted eternity. The path now only moved forward. Then, one day, something changed. You were walking through the city, lost in thought, when you noticed a man sitting on the sidewalk, head bowed, hands trembling. His clothes were torn, his eyes dim with exhaustion. People passed him by as though he were invisible. You hesitated only for a moment before kneeling beside him. You offered him your hand, your left hand. When he took it, a surge of warmth rushed through both of you. His eyes widened. For a brief second, something ancient flickered behind them, a recognition. He whispered, "You have the mark." You froze. The world around you disappeared. His words felt like thunder disguised as breath. You opened your mouth to speak, but he only smiled faintly and said, "The mark does not belong to one. It belongs to all who awaken." Then he placed his hand over yours and added softly, "You are not the only chosen one. You are the reminder." And just like that, he was gone. You looked around, but the crowd had swallowed him. Yet his words echoed within you, reshaping your understanding. You realized then that being chosen was not about being exalted, it was about being entrusted. The mark was not a crown, but a calling to awaken others to their own light, to remind the sleeping that they, too, were made of divine fire. That night, as you sat in the dark, the whisper came again. "Now you see, the mark is not the end, it is the beginning. You are not the destination, you are the bridge." And for the first time, you did not resist. You closed your eyes, placed your left hand over your heart, and felt the pulse of something eternal. Not power, not possession, but purpose. You smiled through the tears, because now you knew the mark was never about you. It was about everyone you would touch, every soul you would awaken, every darkness you would bring light to. You whispered into the quiet night, "If this is the path, I will walk it, even if it costs me everything." And the wind answered softly, "That is why you were chosen." Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The chosen one. The sky that morning felt different, though you could not say why. The light carried a quiet ache, a reminder that revelation always comes dressed as loss before it reveals its truth. You stood at the threshold of your door, staring into the distance, knowing instinctively that something within you was about to be tested again. The mark on your left hand no longer burned, it hummed, a low, steady vibration that seemed to sync with the pulse of the world itself. You had come to accept it as part of you, neither miracle nor curse, but a living promise. Still, a question haunted the corners of your heart. If I am chosen to awaken others, who will awaken me when I fall? You didn't have to wait long for the answer. It began with silence. Not the sacred silence of peace, but the hollow quiet that feels like abandonment. You prayed, but the heavens withheld their voice. The whisper that had once guided you grew faint. Days stretched into weeks, and the warmth of the mark turned cold. Doubt crept in, not as thunder, but as mist, soft, persistent, suffocating. You wondered if you had misunderstood everything. Perhaps the mark was never divine at all. Perhaps it was only your mind's desperate invention to make meaning out of pain. The more you tried to recall the voice, the more it slipped away. You reached for faith, but your hands found only emptiness. That was when fear returned, not of failure, but of silence itself. You had built your life around the whisper, the guidance, the unseen presence. Without it, you felt like a shadow of yourself. You tried to speak the old affirmations, but the words felt hollow, mechanical. You wanted to believe, but belief no longer obeyed your will. And then came the dream. You stood in a vast desert under a starless sky. Your left hand glowed faintly, but each step you took dimmed its light. In the distance stood a figure cloaked in grey. You approached, heart pounding, desperate for recognition. But when the figure turned, you saw your own face, eyes hollow, lips cracked, the mark on your hand fading to nothing. Your reflection spoke. You wanted the light without the shadow, but they are born together. You cannot carry the mark if you refuse its burden. You woke with tears on your face and the sound of your own breath shaking the stillness. The dream felt like judgment, but also mercy. It reminded you that faith is not certainty. It is the choice to walk forward even when the light goes out. So you did. Each morning, you rose before dawn. You lit a single candle and sat in silence, not to hear the voice, but to remember how to listen. The world outside continued to spin, loud and indifferent, but within you, a new rhythm was forming. The mark did not glow again immediately. It waited, as if to see if your devotion would outlast your desire for proof. Days passed, weeks, and slowly you began to change. You no longer prayed for signs. You prayed for strength. You no longer asked for miracles. You asked for meaning. And in that quiet surrender, something profound happened. The whisper returned, not as before, softer, wiser, closer. It said, "You do not find me in the light. You find me in the waiting. The silence is not my absence. It is your initiation." You wept then, but not from sorrow. The tears were release. You finally understood that the divine does not always speak in thunder or fire. Sometimes it speaks through the ache of endurance, the beauty of persistence, the holiness of an unanswered prayer. The mark warmed again, not burning this time, but steady, like a heartbeat aligned with heaven. And with that warmth came a vision not of angels, not of prophecy, but of people. Faces you had seen and forgotten, strangers on the street, a friend who had turned away, a family member who no longer understood you. Each one carried their own invisible mark, dimmed by fear, waiting for someone to remind them they were divine too. You realized then what your silence had taught you. To be chosen was not to be special, it was to be responsible. The divine had not marked you for admiration, but for service. That revelation hit like lightning. All your striving, all your searching for proof, it had never been about what you would receive. It was about what you were willing to give. And so you began again. You reached out to those who had doubted you, not with pride, but with compassion. You spoke not of your mark, but of theirs. You learned to listen before you preached, to heal before you judged. Your words changed, not lofty, but simple, not grand, but true. When you touched others, sometimes the mark on your hand glowed faintly, not for spectacle, but as confirmation that grace moves through the humble, not the proud. You began to see the divine in the ordinary, the light in tired eyes, the faith in broken hearts, the hope that refuses to die even when the world gives it every reason to. But just as you began to walk in this peace, another trial arrived. A new voice, not divine, but dark, rose within you. It whispered the same old lie that has haunted every chosen one before you. Who are you to carry light? You are flawed. You have doubted. You are unworthy. The words cut deep because they were true, at least partly. You were flawed. You had doubted. But that night, staring into the mirror, you remembered the old man's words. The mark burns brighter in those who doubt, because doubt is the beginning of faith. You lifted your left hand, trembling but resolute. You whispered, I am flawed, but I am chosen. I am uncertain, but I am willing. I am not perfect, but I am present. The mark pulsed once, then again, and the darkness fell silent. That was the night you finally understood the true power of the mark. It was not a shield from pain, it was the courage to walk through it. The next morning, you woke with peace unlike any you had known before. Not the fleeting calm that comes from answered prayers, but the deep stillness that comes from trust. You no longer needed constant signs. The mark was no longer proof of your calling, it was the quiet reminder that you had already answered it. The path ahead was still uncertain, but now, uncertainty no longer frightened you. Because you had learned what all chosen ones eventually discover, that faith is not a straight line, it is a spiral, circling deeper until it becomes transformation. You stood at the window as the sun rose, lifting your left hand to the light. The mark shimmered faintly, a silent covenant between heaven and your soul. And for the first time, you whispered not to the divine, but to yourself, I believe in me, too. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The chosen one. Dawn broke differently that day, not in light, but in silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, ancient, purposeful. You awoke before the sun, and for a long moment, you simply listened. There was no whisper this time, no fire in your hand, no trembling in your chest. Only stillness. And yet, it felt holy. You rose slowly, breathing in the faint scent of morning air. The world was waking, but you were already awake, truly awake. You realized that the divine no longer needed to call to you from the outside. It now spoke through your breath, through your pulse, through every quiet thought that dared to trust again. You had spent so long searching for the voice of God, in thunder, in revelation, in the extraordinary. But now, you could hear it in the ordinary, in the sound of water pouring, in the warmth of sunlight touching your face, in the heartbeat beneath your skin. You had finally learned the secret. The chosen are not those who hear God most loudly, but those who listen most deeply. You looked at your left hand again. The mark was faint now, almost invisible. For a moment, panic stirred. Had it faded? Had you lost it? But then came the knowing. It hadn't disappeared. It had merged with you. It no longer needed to burn to remind you who you were. You were the reminder. That realization struck you with both peace and sorrow, because you understood what it meant. The mark had completed its work. The teacher had become silent because the student had become ready. You were no longer waiting for signs. You had become one. You stepped outside. The air felt lighter, though the world around you was unchanged. Cars passed, people hurried, the same noise, the same chaos, but everything carried new meaning. Every stranger seemed sacred. Every moment shimmered with purpose. You saw now what you had missed before. The divine is not found in the distance of heaven, but in the closeness of being fully alive. Yet, even in this clarity, a new tension arose, the weight of responsibility. You remembered the old man's words. You are not the only chosen one, you are the reminder. And now you could feel it, people drawn to you, not because of your strength, but because of your stillness. They sought something they could not name. They saw in you a reflection of what their souls had forgotten. It was humbling, almost unbearable. You wanted to tell them the truth, that you were not their answer, only their mirror. But the mark guided your silence. You learned that true awakening cannot be forced. It must be remembered. And so, you became a quiet guide, speaking less and listening more. There were moments, however, when the old fear returned. In the middle of the night, when shadows stretched too long and silence pressed too hard, doubt whispered its familiar words. What if this is all illusion? What if the light you see is just your own longing wearing disguise? But this time, you did not run. You did not beg the divine for a sign. You simply sat with your doubt, breathing through it, until it softened into understanding, because you had learned what few ever do. Doubt is not the opposite of faith, it is the doorway to it. You whispered into the dark, even if this is only a dream, I will live as if it's real, because truth reveals itself through those who dare to embody it. And in that moment, peace returned, not as a flash of glory, but as a quiet certainty that no longer needed explanation. The next morning, as the first rays of sun broke through the horizon, you stood by the window once more. Your reflection stared back wiser, softer, infinite. You lifted your left hand, tracing the faint outline where the mark once glowed, and whispered, I am not the mark. I am what it awakened. From that day on, you walked differently, not above the world, but within it. You smiled at strangers. You forgave those who could not understand your journey. You stopped preaching about destiny and started living it. Each act of kindness, each word of compassion became your sermon. Each moment of presence became your prayer. You discovered something miraculous. When you touched others with genuine love, their eyes would soften, their posture would shift, and for a fleeting moment, you would see it the same glow you once carried reflected back in them. The divine mark had always been contagious, but not through words, through being. And so, the mission continued, not in revelation, but in resonance. You had become what the world needed most, a living reminder that even in the chaos, there is order. Even in despair, there is design. Even in the smallest life, there is infinite purpose. Still, the journey was not without pain. Some rejected your peace, mocking what they could not grasp. Others clung to you, mistaking your light for their own. But you had learned balance. You did not absorb their shadows, you illuminated them gently. You no longer sought to convince. You simply lived the truth until it spoke for itself. One evening, as the sky turned crimson, you found yourself standing before a river. The water shimmered like liquid fire beneath the fading sun. You knelt, dipped your left hand into the current, and watched the ripples expand outward. You smiled, because you understood now. The mark was never meant to stay still. It was meant to move through you, through others, through every act of grace that follows. You closed your eyes, whispered into the wind, "I am the reminder. I am the vessel. I am the echo of a greater voice that speaks through love." And then, as if the universe itself exhaled, you heard it one final time, the whisper that began everything. "Well done, chosen one. The light you sought is now the light you carry." Tears blurred your vision, but you didn't wipe them away. You let them fall, each drop a reflection of the journey of loss, of doubt, of awakening, of love. As night settled, you rose, feeling lighter than ever before. The world did not need to know your story. It only needed to feel your presence. The mark no longer glowed on your hand, but it burned within your heart, quiet, eternal, unstoppable. You walked away from the river, not as a seeker, but as a reminder, not as one chosen above others, but as one chosen for others. You were no longer waiting for signs. You had become one. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign that your divine purpose is awakening. And remember, the mark was never on your hand. It was always on your soul.